I call this presentation The Scars of the Children. Everyone sitting here today has scars, physical ones that we sometimes bear with pride, and those very deep emotional ones that we only face when our minds turn inwards. Deep scars that still fester, but that we do not have the ability or perhaps the courage to address. Scars that sometimes should never have been formed, and scars we promise ourselves that our children will never ever bear. I found this poem written by a holy man in India, and he says, "Why scars so many, all over the trunk of a coconut tree? Oh, those are the parting kisses buried deep in its bosom by its children, hugging close when death pulls them apart with its brownie grasp." Our personal journey and the scars we form come from many, many areas. Our circumstances of birth, our culture both within and without our families, our relationships, our education, and our personal choices. I was born into the very privileged, true, white Afrikaner family in South Africa. My forefathers were entwined with the colonization of this whole area, the power of the Dutch Reformed Church, and the establishment of the Afrikanerdom. I grew up in a family and a church and a community that not only accepted the premise that races other than white were inferior and subservient, but that it was our mission from God to keep it this way. And today, this is not only a scar on my psyche, but on the world that allowed this to happen. My father fought in World War II and came home with questions and a softening of the attitude, and then we went to live in Zambia. And this is where I grew up. It was an idyllic life for a child. I grew up pretty wild and free and away from the heavy apartheid and the politics of South Africa. But the world soon forced itself into my conscience. Revolution came to the Congo, and as my mother was the head of the Red Cross, I became involved. She was in charge of evacuating all the refugees out of this really horrific war situation that was developing. I spoke French, and it was my duty to stand on that ramp up into the plane until that one really significant day. A plane arrived. I walked up the ramp. I opened the door, and I was confronted with 30 Roman Catholic nuns from one of the convents that had been raped and had their hands cut off. I remember standing at the door of the plane and the smell and the soft moans and prayers, and my world fell apart. I was 14 years old. Another scar and the screaming question, why? But life goes on, you bury it, but it never goes away. I then left for university in South Africa, and this was the University of the Witwatersrand, or Wits as it was called. These were unsettled times, with South Africa becoming a republic and moving further and further into the depths of apartheid. This was the decade of defiance. Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, defying the world, and I suddenly could find voice to my thoughts and my questions. So I joined the ANC and joyously stepped into the demonstrations and straight into that cudgel of a white policeman. How dared I, a South African, speak against the government? I remember the burning feeling of righteousness, the anger, the adrenaline rush, and the brick wall of reality when my body hit that bare cement floor of the women's prison in the old fort. My hands handcuffed behind my back, the cold of the bare cement floor, and the quiet of those around me. And the fear came rushing in. Fear so great that I cannot describe it. And remember, I was the privileged white Afrikaner race. We were held there for a week to teach us a lesson, And to this day, I will not think of the conditions, the food, and the degradations that we endured. And we were the privileged white Afrikaners. I was 16 years old, and I will carry those scars forever. 3 years ago, I took a team of interactors from Vancouver to South Africa, and our wonderful Rotarian hosts took us on a tour of Constitution Hill, where the court for truth and reconciliation now stands. I was so excited to be going to such a symbol of change, but I could feel the hair on the back of my neck rising up. I could feel the cold of a concrete floor, and I could feel this uncontrollable fear starting to consume me as I recognized that today I had to face my past and the fears that still rise in my soul, because Constitution Hill, now the symbol of change and promise, was built on the horrors of the old fort. So more than 50 years to my last footstep on that hill, I joined the students on that tour, starting with a men's prison. And once again, my world fell apart. Oh yes, I had heard the stories from my ANC members about the horrors. I had heard what had been done to people, the perpetrations in those ghastly dungeons. But I had never ever allowed myself to face that reality, to actually see that whipping rack that men were tied to while they received the judgment passed out from a legal court. 50 lashes because you did not have your dompas or your ID documents with you. 50 lashes as they were tied to this medieval rack and lashed with a whip that comes straight out of hell. And I had ignored it. And I did not stop it. I cannot describe the shame that I felt that day or the burning of the small scars that I carry. Scars so small compared to all of those that carried by the masses of the South Africans. I couldn't face the women's prison that day. I was a coward, and I went and sat in the bus and waited for the others. But my catharsis came with sharing the story and my feelings with the young folks we had taken with us that day. The interactors and I talked much about that day, about my feelings, and about what they thought about the whole situation. And I have a clear understanding that they will do all in their power to work to a peaceful world, a world where men do not get tied to a whooping rack, where children do not develop scars. Rotary has been my solace and the vehicle that has allowed me to heal many of my scars. The magic of Rotary allows ordinary people like us to accomplish extraordinary things. Our service not only transforms others' lives, but is itself a life-changing experience for us as well. Through Rotary, we become a part of something larger than ourselves and make Rotary greater than the sum of its parts. I had a dream. I had a dream when I was finishing school in Zambia. My dream was to become this great big African game ranger. But life, much as it is in some parts of the world today, had standards and barriers for girls. So I was not allowed to follow my dream. However, I made myself a promise that one day before I died, I will fulfill this dream. So for my 60th birthday, I gave myself this gift. And off I went to Africa to do my dream. I got my degree in nature conservation and wildlife management, and then I had to do the practical in the bush. This was the most unbelievable experience, to drive the great big Land Cruiser, to shoot the big guns, and to track the big five. I did my eco-training course in northern South Africa in the Sabi Sands Private Game Reserve, and it was this experience that made me come to grips with impossible dreams of youth living in impossible circumstances, youth that bears scars, many that could not be prevented, but many that could be. And it was this experience that really made me take action. One early morning, we drove out of the game reserve to allow one of the ladies who was looking after us in the camp to drop off her children as they had to return to their village to school. A young girl of 9 and a boy of 7 were left on the side of this little dirt road, sitting under a tree to await their ride. As we drove away, I saw the tears pouring down her cheeks, and I said to her, "Are you sad? Are you sad that you're not going to see your children?" And she looked at me and she said, "Yes, I am sad, but I'm also deadly afraid." We have a belief in this community that if a man has sex with an underage girl, he will be protected from AIDS. I do not know if my daughter will be safe. I was stunned. It was like a fist between my eyes. Oh God, keep her safe. Oh God, what do I do? And then I had the opportunity to visit the village again, and I spoke with the chief of the village, and I asked him, "Is this true? Is this really what you believe?" And he said to me, "Yes, this is what we believe, but perhaps it's not true. We need to be told." So I said to him, how? How do we tell the story? What do we do? And he said in these words, "The lifeblood of our villages lie with our children, and we must feed them. Not only food, but education. What we need is education. Education to change the beliefs and cultures. Education to make things right." I was completely stunned and frustrated. How could I make a difference from Canada? Just one person with limited funds. But with the following words running through my mind, "We are guilty of many errors and faults, but our worst crime is abandoning the children, neglecting the fountain of life. Many of the things we need can wait, but the child cannot. Right now, his bones are being formed, his blood is being made, and his senses are being developed. To him, we cannot answer tomorrow. His name is today." And then I understood. I was a member of a Rotary Club, a member of this powerful organization, and I started a journey that turned from just being a member of a Rotary Club to a passionate Rotarian. Over the past 8 years, together with Rotary, we've done many projects, some of which have resulted in the building of 4 nursery schools in these tiny little villages, and we now feed over 600 children a day and have helped 4 communities to break that cycle of poverty and to start feeding their children. Now, I spoke about that team of interactors that we took to South Africa. And on that very last day that they were visiting within those villages, we visited the last little school called Thorndale, just to say goodbye. And the children sang and danced for us, but they also performed a little play. And I give you the words of this play verbatim because they really burnt into my soul. Please remember that this is being acted by 5 children under the age of 7. The name of the play is "The AIDS is Coming." And this is how it goes. AIDS is a killer. No, AIDS is not a killer. You can wear a condom. Come, let us go to the doctor to get tested. Pretend doctor and nurse take the blood, do the testing, and then turn around to the child and say, so sorry, you are positive. The child cries and friends comfort. Don't worry, let's go shopping and we can buy your drugs. When the play was over, I saw the shocked expression on the faces of the team, and part of the shock was because I was joyously crying, dancing, jumping up and down and cheering. And my happiness was because of a picture from 8 years ago of 2 little children sitting under a tree and a mother's tears of fear because of a belief prevalent in those communities that sex with a young virgin protected men from AIDS. And here today was proof that that journey started 8 years ago in educating a community had changed cultural values, resulting in the protection of children through education. The story had come full circle because of Rotary, and less scars to form on those children. In March, once again, I paid a visit to the school, and again, another part to the play. A young 5-year-old, all dressed up in pink, stood up, and she said the following: "This is my body. Don't touch my body. My body is a temple of God, and it's sacred. Don't touch my body." Young girls being taught, young girls being empowered, young girls that will develop fewer scars. In Johannesburg, through an organization and Rotary, we work with the informal settlements. Refilwe services the squatter camps that lie close to the edge of Johannesburg, and the names of these camps resonate through the revolutionary history of South Africa. Alexandria, Diepspreek, Zandspruit, Eskom. Nearly 500,000 people living in the most abominable conditions. No electricity, no sanitation or water, 16 to a room. Total unemployment, no education, just a horror after horror, scar after scar. I could tell you so many stories, but I will tell you only 2. We were deep in Zandspruit with a team of social workers from Refilwe when a young girl came running up to me with a brand new baby in her arms, and she thrusted this baby into my arms and she said, "Please take my baby. Please take my baby with you." And I said, "Why? Why would you want me to take your baby?" And she said, "I'm 14 years old. I have no education. I'm a prostitute. And I'm HIV positive. What future is there for my baby?" You know, again, you break your heart and your world sort of tumbles inwards. But here again, the Refilwe social workers were standing there and they scooped her up. And in March, when I was there again, there she was, living with a foster family, going to school, getting the health care she needed, and her baby was safe and educated and looked after. Now she was cared for, she was looked after. But what of all those others, the ones that have not spoken up? The ones that didn't have the courage to speak up? What of their scars? About 5 years ago, I had a phone call. My cousin phoned, and her words to me were, "Dean, please come. I need you. My husband has been shot." So I got in a plane and landed up in South Africa, and Ria is a medical doctor, and her husband Don was a veterinary surgeon, and they had their practices on a common piece of ground, and they lived there. And one morning at about 10 a.m. in the morning, there was a call at his surgery door, and he went through. And there were 3 black men, and they all had guns, and they shot him for the $10 that he had in his pocket. He died in Ria's arms. When the police released the crime scene on the Monday, I had this realization that there's nobody in this family that I could possibly ask to go and care or clean up the crime scene. So, once again, there I was on my hands and knees, consumed with utter hatred as I wiped up and cleaned up Don's blood off that floor. And there was that unanswered question of why. Don's wife and children to carry the scars of this hate crime, why? And the murderers, why? In the plane flying back to Canada, those thoughts were constantly milling through my mind. And the reality is there really is no answer. We scar people so easily. And when those scars affect or divert normalcy, who is to blame? All that I know with absolute certainty is that we must do something, and we can, and that Rotary is there with its striving to bring peace and human understanding to all. A visit to deep into Alexandria one morning to go and visit a headmistress in a school, a primary school, The school is just a brick building, and it has this courtyard of bricks. There's not a tree, not a blade of grass, no playground for the children. They crammed into rooms 80 children, 90 children, 100 children in grade 1 into one room, that if a child wants to go to a washroom, the others have to slide out. But they're all smiling, they're laughing and doing wonderful, wonderful children's things. They don't show their scars. They don't show what the life has done to them. That will come later. We were met by the headmistress, and I could immediately see that she was in an extremely emotional state. I tried to say that we could come back another time, but she said no, burst into tears. She said, no, I need to tell you what happens within this community. They had assembly that morning, and they all wear a school uniform, and they start with the first grade in the front and the higher grades at the back, and they sort of squat down. And that morning, with the headmistress standing in front of that group of squatting children, she identified 2 little girls who had been raped because of the evidence on their underwear. Now, her frustration was, yes, what had happened to those girls, but that she was powerless to address this. She didn't have the means to be able to care for them and their families. Well, once again, Rotary stepped in, and now there's a funded social worker who really looks after them, guides, and helps them in that school. So once again, Rotary stepped in, and now they do have that crutch that can help them get through the trauma they deal with. But think of the scars of that headmistress, but particularly think of the scars of those little girls. In the preface to The End of Poverty, Bono from the band U2 writes, "We can be that generation that no longer accepts that an accident of latitude determines whether a child lives or dies. But will we be that generation? Will we in the West realize our potential, or will we sleep in the comfort of our affluence with apathy and indifference murmuring softly in our ears? 15,000 people dying every single day, totally needlessly. From AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, you name it, it's there. These are the mothers, the fathers, the teachers, and the children. This is Africa's crisis. That it's not in the nightly news and that we do not treat this as an emergency. This is our crisis. So I think that Bono hits the nail right on the head, this gap between the can-do and the will-do. In my view, this is the greatest gap and the most critical gap in our world. It's greater than the digital divide, the educational gap, the generational gap. The most important gap in this whole world, the gap between what we can do, what we can achieve because we have the ability, the potential, and the resources, and what we will do. I'm haunted more by one line written by Henry David Thoreau than I am by any other line in anything that I have ever read. And he writes, "The mass of humanity go to their grave with their song still in them." Each of us has a song that no one else has. Our one vocation, regardless of our creed or calling, is to sing our song. The greatest of all tragedies can only be that the mass of humanity goes to its grave with their song still in them. I hope you will also be haunted by this line, but that you will also be so bolstered by it that you will go out and that you will sing your song. Because singing your song ultimately is what makes you an effective human being. So together with Rotary, we must be there to offer the children the opportunities and to guide them along their life path so that they can join in a chorus of opportunity to sing their songs and have their dreams come true. There should be no reason why any child should have to walk with scars. It's up to us to reach within to embrace humanity, and in doing so, bring to the world what it really needs, peace. Peace to you all. Thank you.